Videos prepared by our team, including the latest developments and special reports on the war in Israel. You can subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and click the super thanks button below. The Middle East is witnessing the most tense moments of the century due to the war between the Israeli army and Hamas. To maximize this tension, Iran is using proxy militias to target the military bases of Israel's biggest supporter, the United States of America, in the Middle East. The U.S. has strategic military bases in Syria and Iraq. In total, the U.S. has 900 troops in Syria and 2,500 in Iraq. Iran is unleashing its proxy militias into these U.S. military bases in order to reduce Washington's support for Israel and to create chaos and confusion in both countries. U.S. officials have reported that there have been approximately 66 attacks on U.S. military bases in the Middle East since October 17th in Gaza as a result of the war between the Israeli army and Hamas. Of these attacks on U.S. bases, 32 occurred in Iraq and 34 in Syria. The assailants that carried out the attacks were Iran's proxy forces in the Middle East. The most recent attack by pro-Iranian proxy militias was carried out from the Ain al-Assad air base in the desert of Iraq's western Anbar province. The pro-Iranian Hezbollah allegedly used short-range ballistic missiles in the attack. This was the first time since October 17th, when the wave of attacks began, that pro-Iranian proxies had used such munitions against U.S. forces. In other words, this latest attack by pro-Iranian proxy militias had crossed the U.S. red line. For this reason, it was announced that U.S. fighter jets mobilized today for a dramatic retaliatory operation against the attacks of pro-Iranian proxy forces in Iraq. U.S. military AC-130 fighter jets have been heavily bombing Iranian-backed targets in Iraq following repeated attacks on U.S. bases. U.S. Central Command confirmed that U.S. forces struck 2 sites in Iraq earlier today in retaliation for attacks by Iran and Iranian-backed groups. The strikes come as the war between Israel and Hamas continues. The sites bombed by U.S. fighter jets included the Kataib Hezbollah Operations Center and the Kataib Hezbollah Command and Control Post near Al-Anbar and Jurf al-Sakud, south of Baghdad. In Al-Anbar, one of the areas targeted by the U.S. AC-130 fighter jets was the Ain al-Assad air base, where the pro-Iranian Kataib Hezbollah carried out its recent attacks against the United States. So in fact, these U.S. strikes were an act of self-defense against the recent missile attacks by pro-Iranian proxy militias. Following the heavy bombardment by U.S. fighter jets, at least 8 members of the pro-Iranian Kataib Hezbollah organization were neutralized. The number of militants killed is expected to rise in the coming hours. It was also reported that the pro-Iranian Hezbollah will not be able to use the Ain al-Assad air base for ballistic missile attacks for a certain period of time. In other words, the U.S. had severely damaged one of the most important air bases of Iran's proxy forces in Iraq. The Pentagon said this was the first U.S. strike against Iranian proxy forces in Iraq since the U.S. targeted Tehran-linked facilities in Syria 3 times in recent weeks in response to a spike in attacks on U.S. military personnel. In other words, this is the first time that U.S. forces have so clearly warned Iran, and the first time that U.S. forces have taken a clear hard line against Tehran's policies of meddling in the Middle East through the use of proxy forces. Hezbollah, despite Iran's support, realized that it could no longer act freely in the Middle East with these U.S. attacks. In addition to these attacks on proxy forces in Iraq, the U.S. has recently been increasing its military presence in the Middle East as Israel's war on Gaza escalates. In addition to using some of these assets to attack pro-Iranian forces in the region that were targeting U.S. military personnel and bases, particularly in Syria and Iraq, through a kind of low-level reciprocal warfare, there was another objective. This goal was to deter a wider war by sending a message to Hezbollah not to intervene against Israel. which would probably respond by invading Lebanon while the war in Gaza was still raging. Washington warned Tehran to pressure their proxy forces to desist from such attacks, but as we have seen, Iran insisted on ignoring the message. So why did Iran insist on using proxy militias to carry out such suicide attacks, knowing that strong U.S. military presence in the Middle East? Iran may have wanted the U.S. to overreact to these attacks in order to mobilize public opinion in the Middle East, to demand the withdrawal of U.S. troops, and to tie the United States more closely to the ongoing Israeli attacks in Gaza. But fortunately, these Iranian policies are not working at the moment. On the contrary, the U.S. has managed to frustrate Iran's efforts by promising an additional $14 billion in military aid aimed at replenishing Israel's military stockpiles. The U.S. has also sent U.S. naval and air assets to the eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea to deter Hezbollah from attacking Israel. The Pentagon deployed the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, the world's largest carrier, to the eastern Mediterranean, along with several support ships. The USS Gerald Ford is known to have aboard 5,000 sailors, 75 aircraft, and an arsenal of missiles, including those capable of shooting down drones. This deployment was followed in early November by the deployment of the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, which transited the Suez Canal and is currently stationed in the Red Sea. This carrier has aboard 5,000 sailors, a squadron of 9 aircraft, combat helicopters, as well as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operational capabilities. In addition, U.S. CENTCOM announced the deployment of an Ohio-class submarine capable of carrying 154 Tomahawk missiles. A former U.S. military intelligence official told the media that these missiles can deliver a lot of firepower very quickly, and no U.S. adversary can ignore this threat. All these deployments are in addition to the U.S. naval and air presence in the Persian Gulf, where the U.S. military presence was strengthened in early August in response to Iranian attacks and provocations against commercial vessels in these waters. Following these dramatic U.S. deployments against forces in the Middle East, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the pro-Iranian Hezbollah, shared a critical assessment. Hezbollah's Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, in his highly anticipated and watched first speech, sent a message to Washington, stating that all options were on the table. Secretary General Nasrallah's message was that the U.S. fleets in the Mediterranean would not affect Hezbollah. But even though Secretary General Nasrallah's speech contained a lot of bravado, it was clearly a disappointment for militias in the region who had hoped that it would signal that Hezbollah would soon launch a major attack on Israel with a significant stockpile of missiles. Later in his second and final speech, Secretary General Nasrallah ensured that Hezbollah remained neutral on the issue of joining the war, but emphasized that the decision to go to war against Israel would be determined by developments on the ground. In other words, Hezbollah saw the U.S. support for Israel and its military preparations, Navy and Air Force deployments in the Middle East as a major deterrent. In short, every single offensive operation and every single military step taken by the United States in the Middle East is seen as a major deterrent to Iran's policies in this region. Thank you for watching us. We work day and night to bring you the fastest and most reliable news. In order not to miss the videos prepared by our team, including the latest developments and special reports on the war in Israel, you can subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and click the super thanks button below. See you in our next work.